We're going to try to start a couple of minutes early because we have such an amazing turnout, and I'm so happy you all came. And we have such great speakers that we want to make sure we get as many of your questions answered as possible. So we're sneaking in before the 8 o'clock hour. Hope nobody's going to object to it. I'm Roseanne Benedict. I'm the president of the Riverside Association, and like I said, I'm thrilled to have all of you here. I hope that you all got my email that said, come on down, even though it's cold out, come on down and enjoy some hot coffee and some hot topics. I also want to make sure you know that Ada's, which will be opening any week now, Ada's has donated a basket of goodies over there. They had some fudge brownies and blondies, and they were made by Mike, and I'm going to just slaughter his name, but it's Pietrafesso, right? Pietrafesso, P-I-E-T-R-A-F-E-S-O. He said you can just call him Mike. But Mike and Krista are going to be the new owners of Ada's, and lovely young couple. He's from Greenwich, western part of Greenwich, and so they'll be opening in 2 weeks. So that's the little plug for Ada's. We're going to take care of some business first. I'd like to call up Michelle Wolfram and Sarah Gleason. Come on, Michelle and Sarah. Michelle and Sarah were on our board this year, and sadly they're leaving our board and will not be continuing. For this past year, and please come back to us, Michelle. Please come back. And Sarah. Sarah, we need Sarah. Sarah laid out this whole refreshments. She's been doing that for years, and she knows it like the back of her hand. So next year when you come, can't promise there's going to be organization in the refreshment section, but hopefully Sarah will come back and help us for that. I'd like to announce our new board. I'm Roseanne Benedict. I'm going to stay on as president. And I'd like the board to come up here, so that way I'm not alone. We have Vice President Daryl LeMakes. Daryl. We have Steve Thompson as our treasurer, over to my right. We have Secretary Wendy Enlow. We have on our board Bill Howland. Bill. Del Everhart, is Del here? Where's Del? Oh, here's Del. Todd Murphy, who saved us $1,000 on our insurance this year. I'm going to work on mine next. Reedy Parker, who we twisted her arm and she's staying on board. And Suzanne Ellison, who's home with a headache, and we twisted her arm to stay on board too. Allie Fells. Allie, Nora Maloney, Angela Swift, she's busy in the back door, by the back door there. Pete Uri, where's Peter? Oh, there he is. And then our new members, we're thrilled to have new members, Donna Geoffrey, come on up, Donna. Liz Peldunas, and Jessica Wren. So this is our new board for 2016. We look forward to having a very productive 2016. I want to remind you, if you do not get our email blasts, please go see Angela or Rini by the back table. Give us your email address. We don't overwhelm you with emails. I don't think we do at least. But we keep you informed on things that are going on in and around the neighborhood. And anytime you have an issue, concern, we really want to be here for you. So contact any one of our board members. Contact me. You can email me at riverside.association@yahoo.com anytime you want, and I'll do my best to answer. So, all right. Thank you, board members. We now want to approve our minutes from our last meeting. If anyone wants a copy of the minutes, they're by the back door. But I'd like someone to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Good. And someone to second?
Second.
Okay, great. Steve Thompson, you want to come on up and talk about your treasury report? I'm sorry? Second. Absolutely. Oh. I'm a terrible president.
Thank you, Rosa. My name is Steve Thompson. I began my tenure as treasurer for the association on February 5th, 2015. And before I begin my formal report, I just wanted to point out that the association is not for profit. The board members are all volunteers, and we exist entirely from donations from you as members. So thank you very much to all of you for sending me your donations. I think it is important to note that we also have a very healthy balance right now in the Riverside Association banking accounts, but we do so purposefully. The annual cost of insurance combined with other corporate expenses, this meeting, the annual flyer, printing and postage, etc., is close to about $4,500 every year. That's before we even start. We therefore believe it is necessary to maintain about 2 years' worth of money as a cushion for us. So, on the formal side, as I said, I took over as treasurer at the beginning of this year. At that time when I took over, I was content with the bookkeeping and accounting processes of my predecessor, and I took full responsibility for the money on February 5th. The balance that was brought forward from 2015 was $12,358.46. This year, the total corporate expenses amounted to $2,149. The annual general meeting expenses, $400. The newsletter expense, $2,784. Our total civic activities and donations amounted to $1,130.42. Some of those donations were to the Greenwich Police Canine Association, the Mother's Day Bike Ride, and I think there were 1 or 2 others. We also put on this year a bike safety course at Riverside School, where we had some police officers come and join us, and we had about 30-40 kids show up that day to take part in a 2-hour course. That cost was $780, and that brought us a total expenditure for 2015 to $9,450.67. The total revenue that we collected, $7,050 dues by check, $123.42 via PayPal. So come on, folks, let's get into this electronic system. Please, I have to stand at the bank with all these checks. We actually amounted $2.73 in interest. This brought our grand total to $7,176.14. That balance being brought forward, ending December 31st, 2015, gives a grand total of $10,086.21.
You said we're a non-profit, so our dues are tax deductible?
Good.
No,
Do we have any tax fee?
they're dues for membership, and they're not a charitable contribution.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Is there another? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah.
Oh, so they are tax deductible?
We can find out the answer to someone else.
They're not. They are not. They are not deductible.
Okay. Okay, so if you want to say, repeat what Mary just said?
No.
Okay. Mary Ferry said that when she was on the board, that's when we became the 503C4? 501C4. And so all, 3 or 4? Okay. And so all the dues are dues and they're not tax deductible. Thank you.
Any easy questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay. I have to what? I do? Okay, is everyone in favor of the treasurer's report? Is that what we do? Anyone not in favor? Thank God.
What's the insurance for? You mentioned the cost of insurance.
Todd Murphy. Where's Todd? You want to come up and explain what the insurance is for?
There are two policies. One is directors and officers liability for the board members, and then there's general liability for events like this when we have to provide insurance to the church or other venues that we have.
Okay, so the Riverside Association has been very busy this year. We participated in the Mother's Day bike race where we handed out water. We had a lecture on addiction. We offered a well-attended bike safety course, which Steve had mentioned earlier. We accepted the Greenwich Historical Society recognized the Riverside Avenue Bridge, and we accepted that plaque for the Greenwich Historical Society. We continue to be a resource for ongoing events in the community and kept our members up to date via email blasts and our newsletter. We attended many meetings pertaining to the Eastern Greenwich Town Plan proposal. We met with town officials, such as Joe and Peter, to have the boulders moved at the DeLuca Park for better access to the Miamis Pond. And we coordinated the planting of 350 daffodil bulbs at North Miamis School with the help of the second graders. We also dedicated a plaque and a tree to the late Bill Osgood, and that was finally acknowledged this past week. So if anyone's down in Binney Park, take a walk around and see that wonderful plaque and tree in honor of Bill Osgood. He maintained many He maintained 5, actually, gardens on plots of land owned by the town in Riverside, and he did an amazing job. He was a spectacular gardener, and we actually have that continued by some of our Riverside Association and their friends. So Pete Urey, where's Pete Urey? Pete Urey's in the back. If anyone has a green thumb and is interested in helping Pete Urey maintain some of those gardens that Bill Osgood maintained, please go see Peter after the meeting and get signed up to help, because we really appreciate having our gardens look beautiful.
Roseanne,
Yes, Peter?
Joan Osgood is here too. Maybe she could stand up a second.
Okay,
Where's
Joan
Joan?
Osgood is Bill's wife.
She
Where's
here?
Joan? Okay, so we're going to get started because we have a lot to discuss. As you know, I sent out an email prior to the meeting telling you that we're going to have these 3 wonderful speakers. And if you had questions in advance, I would appreciate those questions, and I did get quite a few, and I thank you for those because it makes their job easier when they know exactly what your concerns are. So anybody that sent me an email via the Riverside Association Yahoo account, I did take those questions and I divvied them up between Peter, Joe, and Lauren, and they hopefully will answer all your questions. We are going to take questions from the seats. There's an index card on your seat. If you have any questions, you can pass those over to Nora. Just raise your hand, Nora will come and collect them, and hopefully, if you didn't already submit the question, we'll get it answered before you leave. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Peter Tessie and have him answer your questions.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you to respond to issues of concern to your neighborhood association. For the last several years, we have enjoyed a wonderful relationship with not only this neighborhood association, but those representing residents throughout our community. And the neighborhood associations serve as an important vehicle into the decision-making process that we on the governing bodies of the town rely upon as we go forth and look to be the stewards for the town of Greenwich. We do so with a professional management team, 2 of which are represented here tonight, and we'll hear more from later, but certainly it is a collective effort. I want to recognize in the audience, I do see 3 of the members of our BET, our finance board, for those who are not familiar. Jeff Raymer, Bill Drake, and Leslie Tarkington, if I've omitted anyone, and Nancy Weisler. Nancy, thank you. They're an integral part of what we will be doing over the next several months in formulating a budget for the town for the fiscal year 16-17. Also, I saw Laura Erickson, Chairman of the Board of Ed, as well as Jennifer Dayton. And if there's any other Board of Ed members, I acknowledge their presence. And then finally, our representatives to Hartford, Fred Camillo and Mike Pacino are here as well. We work with them. So I know the clock's ticking, so I try to take the issues that you presented and break them into buckets, the questions. The one that I'm going to add at the outset, because it essentially drives everything we do, is give you a little overview of the budget for the town as it's being developed and where it stands today. So at this point in the process, the town's finance board set a guideline for us to work off of, that being the schools and town departments. That guideline is keeping with prior years in terms of controlling the rate of increase to the town's mill rate, in addition to controlling the rate of increase to our operating budgets and our capital costs. Right now, our operating budget, in looking ahead, is in quite good shape in terms of the relative increase based upon our contractual obligations. We're looking at essentially 2% increases on the town side and a little over 2 on the school side, 2.1. That's fine, that's contractual basically. The main drivers of our increases in costs are not unlike what many of you are experiencing individually. They are healthcare. Our healthcare costs as an enterprise are growing well in excess of what we see as a national trend, and it's an area of great attention not only of the town administration but the BET and the Board of Ed has been attuned to this. So that's a big component of the overall increase that we work to mitigate. In addition, our school lunch fund is facing a deficit. It's been subsidized the last couple of years, and it is a growing concern for which all the folks I mentioned are attuned to and looking to address. The other big item that is not a surprise to us, perhaps the magnitude of variance is a surprise, is that we are the only community in the state of Connecticut that operates a skilled nursing facility, the Nathaniel Witherell. Stanford had operated one. They just were about to close it, and I believe a private enterprise has come in to operate it, to sustain it, but they're going out of the business, as I can discern from the news. So we are looking at a contribution to the Nathaniel Witherell upwards of $5 million, in excess of $5 million. This year, I believe, it was around 2.4. The budget gurus will correct me if I'm off by 100,000 or more, but those are the parameters. That makes developing a budget that funds the services we all desire, and we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute, in keeping our rate of increase in our taxes at a modest and predictable level, all the more challenging because they become less discretionary in the sense fixed costs. If we have a pension contribution we have to make, we fund our post-employment benefits. So we are focused over the next few weeks in the Selectman's office of producing a consolidated capital budget and town operating budget joined with the school's operating budget to present to the BET Budget Committee that is within their guidelines. So the areas in which we can look for reductions are clearly in the capital outlay, the amount we actually fund annually. We can reduce that and achieve some savings. We can look at our fund balance. We just came off a program of being rated by the 3 financial rating agencies for our short-term debt and bond anticipation notes. No surprise, we retain AAA ratings in primary part due to our conservative fiscal practices and setting aside for future liabilities. That being said, though, fund balance is one area in which we have used to essentially, you could say, balance the budget or reduce the overall rate of increase in taxes. And fund balance is nothing more than our ability to wisely manage the resources we budgeted for today and not spend them. And so you can read Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and they go through all of this very thoroughly, as well as read our CAFR, and it tells you our financial standing. But that's one area which would be used to lower the overall rate of increase in the mill rate. And I will be looking at over the next 2 weeks to make those discretionary decisions to achieve the outcome that I believe the citizens expect. And again, that's what I view my role as a fiduciary for the citizens. In terms of the issues that you presented, I'd like to start with one that we're probably not thinking about right now due to the temperatures outside, but certainly the beach is something we all enjoy and take great pride in this town. And it's something that we're very fortunate to have had tremendous private support, particularly at Greenwich Point, to enhance, thanks to the Greenwich Point Conservancy. But we have had a number of comments presented to us, well thought out comments about the beach experience in the 2015 season, summer. Those comments were very well articulated and centered around issues such as overcrowding, non-adherence to existing ordinances, and safety and concern of those who actually visit the beach. We have a Board of Parks and Recreation. It's an advisory board to the Office of the First Selectman. There's 7 citizens who sit on it. I see Gary Astamel is here. He was a longstanding member of that board, I think for 2 decades. But they put together a lot of information through research on looking at the issues of concern, what's taking place in peer communities, and making a recommendation to me and the Board of Selectmen. That was represented in this report here. We use this to make our decisions, and so the decisions to address these concerns are 2-part. One is just looking at how we administer and operate the facility. That's under the aegis of Joe and his division that oversees parks and beaches. So one of the first things we did and we noted is that we closed a loophole. We closed a loophole that allowed individuals, whether they're residents or non-residents, to enter the park prior to 7 a.m., correct? 7? And essentially set up shop for the day. So they circumvented our normal entry policy. Very clever, but certainly perhaps contributed, and I say perhaps because we don't know for sure, but clearly people were doing this, circumvented our fees and so forth. So that's going to be addressed by staffing the gate from inception. In addition, many of the complaints that I read, and I hate to point out any one person, but I want to compliment them. Jane, I want to compliment you for your comments were excellent, and I took them as sort of my portrait of all the comments, the way you articulated them. Thank you very much. Jane Brash, I'm going to compliment you for that. Thank you. She articulated the safety concerns as being one whereby people are not adhering to traffic signalization, pedestrian safety, ordinances related to animals off leash during the peak season, boom boxes, and just general disregard for civil order. To address that, we are going to staff the beach with a police officer during the Memorial Day to Labor Day time period for weekends and holidays. These are our peak periods, and we are going to establish through a memo internally what we expect that officer to do. Obviously enforce the law, but we want more than community police, and we want someone who's going to show that you come to our parks, whether you're a resident or not, you're going to respect the ordinances and you're going to respect the resource, because really what we're looking to do is protect the natural resource. So that's looking at things operationally. From a fee structure, the Board of Selectmen has authority over setting the fees for the year. We just did that this morning at our meeting after first reviewing them on December 18th, so we had time to get input and percolate. We had the department and this advisory group look at what other communities are charging for non-residents, and it's particularly a automobile access fee. We were at $25. I believe many of our peer communities were up in excess of $35 to $40 for entry. So we upped our fee to $35 starting with the new season. What Greenwich has and other communities do not have is a day pass fee for non-residents. So we upped that fee $1. So when you think about an individual who does not live in Greenwich, who comes to the beach via automobile, the cost is $42. We believe that is a reasonable, economically justified fee to charge for the use of the resource. We all know, for those who've been here since before 2001 or since 2001, we had a lawsuit we lost. We had to open up our beaches to non-residents. I know some of the questions centered on whether or not you could restrict on certain days and so forth. The answer from legal is clearly not. There were questions that centered on could we have kind of a two-tier entry process, priority. That is not looked upon favorably by the legal advisors. But clearly we can charge what I would call an economically compatible fee for the cost of using the resource. And we're going to look at it again in the next year based upon this year's experience, and if we have to adjust upwards to meet what the other communities are doing, we will do so. But the fee in itself is not a means for crowds control. Just to put that point on. In terms of the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, another very hot topic for many years. There were several study committees who looked at doing different things. I think the most recent one that I recall was headed up by Irv Porter and Karen Sadek-Khan from Old Greenwich. Their proposal was very much a more grand facility on par with perhaps what we know today as Chelsea Piers. They admitted, and Irv Porter is a member of my Capital Improvement Program Committee, and he was at the meeting, and he said, we missed, that was then, this is now. There's not the market for that. What there is a market for, in my mind, as an elected official who listens to a lot of people, is essentially what we have, a community center, civic center that houses a gymnasium, a recreational facility, exhibition hall, and some multi-purpose rooms that allow community activities from garden clubs to Cub Scouts to flu clinics to some private exhibitions that support community charity to take place. And we've had that building since the 60s. I believe it was purchased under Lowell Weiker's administration as first selectman from Electrolux for under $700,000. And we've nursed it along, but it's tired. And we were fortunate several years ago, the BET did agree and RTM to fund replacement of the roof, the ceiling, and the lighting for the gymnasium, so it functions. Was there over the holidays for roller skating for the first time, and everyone seemed to have fun. I'm the only one who was looking up at the ceiling, but I wasn't on roller skates. But I was proud of the fact we at least kept it going, because the last thing that we would want to see is a boarded up building in any part of this town owned by the town. So now we're at a decision point, and so the decision point is going to be, we've got a preliminary design funding last year, thank you RTM and BET. We're coming back for the next phase. Joe will then get more definitive designs, and we will have to then make a decision, community decision, BET, RTM, whether we want to build this structure. Those finite dollars of what it's going to cost will not be known until we go through this, but the facility in many ways will mirror what we have in terms of size and scope, and I think fit what we see as the demand based upon the current usage today. So that's the Civic Center. Binning Park Pond, or Binning Park, Joe, I'm going to let you have some fun with this in a while, but we do know that we did get funding through the prescribed authorities to do the initial assessment of determining sedimentation that's been building up. The whole approach to this is not just dredge, but to address what's causing the sedimentation and input a system to collect it so that when we do dredge, we're not back to where we were in 5 or 10 years. So that part is in process, along with, I see in the budget for this year, allocations to fix some bridges leading into that area, as well as we're in the process of cultivating a private, public-private partnerships. We've been very successful due to the generosity of one of our more affluent residents in contributing to Bruce Park, Byron Park, in a desire to look at our park system, our formalized park system at large. So I'm encouraged. I see it as the new century of philanthropy, and I see it very much coming to Old Greenwich, as has been the case in its history. So Binning Park, Joe, you can take some of the more finite points. Traffic and sidewalks. I do know that there is in here a project in Riverside. When I was on the BET, I remember Safe Routes to Schools was the rage, and Lockwood, I think, was the rage back then, and it finally got built. In this year's proposed budget, there is funding in the amount of $800,000 to do Summit Road Phase 1, Summit Road / Oval Avenue Phase 2 construction, and then engineer design for future projects. Again, this is not something that's come out of the blue. We have had since 2009 a formalized study that was driven by citizen input where we held meetings all over this town to determine a weighting to need, priority and need for identified areas that had occurred a few years before. So we have that document as the foundation. It's called the First Selectman's Pedestrian Safety Advisory Committee Report and Recommendations and Criteria for Establishing New Public Means Sidewalks. And this was one of the areas that had been identified. There's a lot that goes into this. I know I lived through the Hearthstone Drive sidewalk, and I know there was a lot of varying opinions within the neighborhood, those who wanted it, those who didn't, which side. We spent an innumerable amount of time accommodating where the mailbox hot went. Believe it or not, it got into even BET sitting down and getting into this. Imagine a finance board determining where a public improvement went of that scale. But it speaks to people's sensitivity to neighborhood character and not wanting to change dramatically what people perceive or feel a community is about. So this funding is in here now and is part of a coordinated plan. You all will have an opportunity to speak in favor or oppose next Thursday, so it will be a week from tonight at Town Hall beginning at 6. We're going to have a public hearing. So essentially you could come, you can look at this document, it's on the Greenwich website, read through the details, and register opinion with us prior to making any formal decision. Know that any decision that I make is of course subject to change. You could almost count on it by the BET. If I were betting, I'd count on it. And then ultimately the RTM. And I have to say, I feel so good about this year's process so far because there's such an engagement on the part of all the groups early. And I was saying to Laura and some of those, the chemistry just seems right. I mean, we're really getting into the real specifics, and it's raising some pointed questions. So it's all good. Some other quick things on traffic. I know we heard about the infamous Exit 5 interchange. That's certainly a perennial favorite. We know that Route 1 is a state road, and we have impressed upon the state DOT that we would favor improvements to that intersection for safety reasons. This is I-95, Exit 5, off-ramp. I believe it includes the McDonald's thing. I will admit, I was a guy last week who pulled out and got stuck in the middle for the first time, and I was like, I hope no one sees me because I don't. But it is still a problem. Some of it is confluence of events and people exercising judgment at certain times. But needless to say, it's a CONDOT issue. We have to impress upon them. They do have plans. They're talking about widening Interstate 95. We have no definitive sense that it would involve this. We don't even have a sense when that will take place. I know that the Commissioner of Transportation spoke to me in relation to that topic several weeks ago as it concerned a Byram project. And again, he's saying the focus really is going to initially be through the Stamford-Bridgeport corridor. We all know the condition of the state financially. We all know the length of time it takes to do a project, so I'm not holding my breath. I like the guy who will be at the Nathaniel Witherell when they finish that, because I don't see it happening in all Canada. I just don't. And again, Public Works Traffic Engineering, though, monitors that. There was a couple of other, Indian Head Road. So Indian Head Road, there was a issue of excessive speed. Thanks to the Public Works Deputy Commissioner, we are going to be addressing at the Board of Selectmen level as the traffic authority for the town a request to install a speed limit sign or establish a speed limit. They've done traffic counts recently. The count shows that the 85th percentile speed being approximately 32 miles per hour. So they're going to request 25. Once the Board of Selectmen approves it, it has to go up to the State Traffic Commission for review. They send back, after they review it, an authorization that yes, it's granted, and then the signs go up, and then the police have a greater capacity to enforce it when it's posted. If it's not posted, I think people say it resorts to 25, but seeing it gives greater enforcement authority. Just going down traffic. Oh, big one for Old Greenwich. And Mike, I see Mike Bacino is here, and he represents the 150th and has been deeply involved in this. The railroad bridge, Metro North Railroad Bridge and the Tomac Avenue Bridge, big projects deeply impacting the Old Greenwich community, but of course carrying up over into Riverside. There is a website, I went on it, checked it out tonight. If you just put in Old Greenwich
Bridge rehab project.
Station Bridge Rehab, Old Greenwich Station Bridge Rehab.com. They give you wonderful pictures, updates, everything you need to know about the project. It's a long time coming. I know that they're looking to mitigate the impact to the businesses, and we're going to have to, keep close touch with them on it. But I feel good that that will get done finally, because it is an eyesore. Someone asked a question which I'm going to say I don't have an answer to, but it said, can we install a sign in front of GHS similar to New Canaan High School to announce the scheduled high school sports or the goings-on at the school? I think I would say that's a discussion point for parks and schools, but I think it's something that we'll get to consideration. I think that will covers most of them. If I omitted anybody, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is bring Joe Siciliano up, and then Nora will have any questions for those two in particular, and then we'll bring our final speaker up.
There's something I do want to say.
Okay.
I'll feel badly if I don't get to do it. I'm a little bit nerdy about this. So one of the questions said, what are your 3 priorities for Riverside in 2016, or what I saw it as, what are you going to do for Riverside, or what to improve it? Some of the things that we do for the whole town perhaps aren't in spotlights, but asphalt paving, and I see Mr. Raymer here, and he was a big advocate for increasing that annual allocation in the budget, I recall, from 2.5 to 3 several years ago. And what that does is allow the town to maintain a certain level of condition for all of our various category roads. And in this document, believe it or not, the Department of Public Works provides to us as decision makers where they're going to apply that surface. And they do it by what they call boroughs and sections. So you can look in here and it will say which roads in Riverside are scheduled for pavement within the next year. And so I thought that was kind of a neat thing to share with you because it directly impacts you. So looking at this page 45 and 46 in the draft capital budget, I'm just going to read out street names. Owen Oak, Wescombe Wood, and there's sections that they do it from. Dorchester, Hearthstone, Knoll Street. Help me out with this one. My doctor was on Matilides many years ago. Miltides? Pleasant Street, Spring Street, Sunshine and Willow. So I share that with you because that's the level of detail the public has when they want to look into how the dollars are being allocated. So those are presently in here, and of course, it's subject to change based on need, meaning if we have a horrible winter in the next 2 months and we have deplorable deterioration, they recalibrate. But this is what the plan is based upon their assessment criteria of condition of roads.
Thank you, Peter. Speak a little bit about some of the questions that were asked of him.
Sure. I'll try not to duplicate with the same topics that Peter covered that were in common between both of us with the questions, but I can offer a little bit more detail like in Binning Park. So one of the questions was what's going on in Binning Park, so I'll give you kind of just a little roster of things that have been going on. The Binning Park Master Plan was completed in 2015. We had a consultant, Peter Uri, some other folks maybe in the room have had some input. Peter was a direct member of the committee. We hired a consultant, Martha Lyons, and we have a complete master plan. And we had a public session at the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center for input. So we have that collaboration. We currently are working on a full landscape plan for Binning Park. We should have that by early spring. I was promised the draft next month. It's February. And so we'll have the draft, then we'll have another committee meeting. We'll have some concurrence on the landscape plan, including the signage. There was a question in my packet about signage for Binning Park. That will also be addressed in the landscape portion of the plan. In this year's current budget, we have $150,000 that's been appropriated by the town, the BET, and so we're working off a balance of $150,000, and next year we'll be requesting an additional $100,000 to do to make a contribution to the landscape planting. We have some donations by private individuals. The Board of Parks and Recreation picked up a $30,000 donation from a family who wants to concentrate on a certain part of Binning Park. And hopefully, as Peter said, we can do some additional fundraising through some of our programs and initiatives that we have out there with some private citizens who are interested in parks. And we can put a nice package together, and you'll see some significant improvements moving forward into the spring, summer, and into the fall of next year. So that's what's going on in Binning Park, and hopefully all of that will come together. So the committee worked very efficiently, and we feel confident that we can move this forward in segments that will benefit the park users and the local residents. Just to kind of move to another topic, there was a couple of questions on my roster here about Riverside School, planting of trees, because a certain number of trees were taken down as a result of a request in a public hearing from the tree warden. In the decision for taking those trees down, there was also a decision for replanting. So there's a requirement actually for replanting, that will be executed by the tree warden with cooperation with the PTA and the school principal, etc. So that's out there. It is mandated by the decision of the tree warden in taking those additional trees down. There's also some discussion about the hedges and such around the playground. Obviously, they're in a dormant state right now. We'll take a look at that. We do understand that there needs to be some division between the playground and the road, which I think that's Henry, and that just for safety reasons. So we'll look at those hedges. The school board at this time really doesn't like using hedges because it kind of masks the playground area. So maybe we'll look at other ways to do that so that we can have that separation. They clearly want to have it open so it can be clearly seen by the street, so that police officers and citizens who are kind of walking by can help monitor the playground activity and things that are going on there. So that's on our list of things to do. There was an item that someone sent in about Cary Road and Lakeview Drive, and unfortunately I talked with Katie DeLuca from Planning and Zoning today about some residents talking about eminent domain and access to the pond. Katie couldn't really give me that much information, even though she did recall it, but that's an issue that needs to be kind of additionally investigated. I didn't just want to skip it, but I did have a conversation with Katie on that. As Peter said, the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, we have a $200,000 allocation right now. We're looking at 35% of the design phase. We're asking for an additional $300,000 in this year's budget appropriation to bring it to 100% of the design phase, and then to look out on what the final cost would be to do the construction. So that's a couple of things that were on my list. I will make a couple of comments about beach overcrowding. Peter covered the initial issues about police coverage, etc. But Just so you know in advance that folks who need to buy guest passes to take their guests or friends to the beach over the summer, we will be only selling them Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 at the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center and at the Western Greenwich Civic Center. They will no longer be sold at Town Hall, but you as a card holder, if you have a beach pass, that's a seasonal beach pass, will be able to buy them online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you want to buy them without having to go to the Civic Center during the week, you can go online whenever you'd like, and as long as you've been pre-approved as an official card holder, resident, you'll be able to purchase those online. It'll come out printed, it'll look like a bigger piece of paper, but it'll have a barcode on there, and that barcode will indicate to us when we swipe it that it's been sold to you, and so you'll be able to do that. So if you're not a card holder, you'll have to go to Eastern Civic Center or Western Civic Center Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, to purchase your day passes or parking passes. So that's a big step in trying to deal with a couple other things. Skating. Skating seems to be an issue that not to be funny, only comes up in the winter, but Binney Park skating and Bruce Park skating. I'm going to tell you a little story. I've been doing this a long time. In 1971, I was the skate guard at Binney Park in Pioneer. That was my first job. I didn't know how to skate. I was a swimmer. I played basketball and I was a swimmer. I had no idea what skating was about. Took a job as a skate guard and worked at mostly at Pioneer, but sometimes at Binney Park. Somebody wrote in that said that about Bruce Park, my whole career, I've never experienced skating at Bruce Park, even though my parents and other folks that I've known who live in Greenwich for a long time have said that was definitely done. Excuse me? You skated there? So at the end of the day, we haven't had skating at Binney Park for 10 years. I went back and looked at the last time the program was funded. It was funded in 2004, 2005. And at that time, it was a result of a budget cut because we were getting pinched for budget cuts. And at the time, we just said, this is a maybe project. I mean, if it freezes, we can have it. If it doesn't freeze it, we have a rink that we need to support. So it was it was demonstrated as a budget cut for the supervision of the pond, having skate guards out there, but also the other part of the budget, which was for the maintenance of the ice. We'd have our park foreman check the ice, we'd clean the ice. There's a bunch of things in the process that we would do. So all of that money was taken out of our budget. I know that there's been some active conversation about having skating in Binney Park again. My own board is committed to keep taking a look at it to see whether we can get it funded in certain various ways, and maybe that is possible. I know that the dredging, eventually when that happens, will help with the process, with creating decent ice for skating. The standard is for ice is really, if you know, it's a minimum of 6 inches before you can put more than a single person on the ice. There's a whole packet I downloaded the other day about ice conditions and how much. So you really have to have between 6 and 9 inches of ice on Binney Park Pond to have any kind of crowds of skating. Now, I remember when I was a skating guard there, we'd see 200 or 300 people, in an afternoon on an ice shear. So you really have to make sure that it was substantial and safe. It's not a closed door. We will talk about it. We have been talking about it at the board level. It's just that we seem to get pushed back because of other department priorities, but it's not forgotten. And I don't think my board will let me forget about it. So it's out there. We'll see if we can come to some resolution or maybe somehow partner so that we can deal with moving forward. We've looked at other opportunities of putting artificial ponds upland and on grass surfaces and parking lots and tennis courts and all this kind of stuff. I know it doesn't have the same effect, but it's a lot easier to freeze and it's a lot easier to maintain if that were to happen. So there's a discussion. Rick Lowe on the Board of Parks and Recreation, I don't know if anybody knows Rick. He's kind of spearheading it. He's been a hockey player, he's been a skater all his life, and every time we have a conversation, which is monthly, he doesn't let me forget it. So I'll rest assured that it's in the pipeline. I'm just trying to think of what else is here. We talked about Old Craddock, Riverside School. I think that's most of it. And if there's a question off the floor, I'll take
Yeah,
it.
we're gonna have Nora now
So I
just
want-
ask a couple of quick questions of Peter and or Joe, and then we'll bring Lauren Elliott, who I know you're all
Does
very
anyone else
anxious
have
to-
any other questions? All right, we have one question for Peter that came from the floor, and that pertains to Todd's point. The question is, why only a $1 increase at the beach?
Again, I think the answer I gave before is we look at an overall economic analysis. We have a day pass fee, the other communities don't. And when you take the two and you look at them in totality, we're within the range of what our peer communities charge. So again, we're trying to base it on economics, not as a mechanism to deter people, because do the inference that perhaps would be not palatable to the justice system if someone brought a complaint. So that's why it's economic. It's looking at what can you do, and it's usually a little bit each year. And that's the case with all of our fees. There was some today that actually dropped like $5 or $10 based upon experience, based upon the fact we weren't garnering
We weren't in the market yet.
right. We weren't in the market, so it's really a market analysis that drives it.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions here for Joe. The first one here is, what can be done about parking around Binney Park?
We could ask people to take less cars to Vinton Park, that would be great. That would be the first suggestion. Second suggestion is we are, through the master plan, there is a section about parking. We've looked at trying to deal with different parking arrangements, whether it's different sides of the road. There was a suggestion about, a 45-degree angle parking, but that creates another issue of backing into traffic and pedestrians and children. Scheduling is a big issue at Binney Park as far as what takes place there. So to look at the scheduling of events such as games that are played or other activities that are going on, because there maybe isn't enough transition time. So all of this was kind of brought out in our report, and it's really our responsibility to kind of look at what might resolve some of the issues, or at least ease it a little bit. I think the last thing all of us don't want is to create more parking. I mean, we don't want to create more asphalt or other surfaces that would be just specifically for parking. So we have to take a responsibility to encourage people to walk to the park, scheduling of games and activities, and also looking at how the current parking is situated. And I know Bruce Spayman, our park superintendent, has been out there with some folks from the association and looked at a couple of variances. Obviously, angled parking is a big solution because you can get more cars in, but it's very dangerous in a park situation where you're backing into traffic and pedestrians crossing and children on bicycles and adults and all kinds of baby carriages and all kinds of other good things going on. So, we have a limited resource of parking. So, my strong suggestion is we get a campaign together to say, walk to the park, or maybe it's part of the exercise program.
Alternate, I have another one for Peter, and this also pertains to Todd's. Has the board thought about surge pricing for the beach, which would avoid the question of restrictive pricing? Surge, that's the question. If the selectmen have thought about surge pricing for the beach, as opposed to. This also, I think and now I'm going back to Joe, I think you touched upon this, but I did get a question from the floor regarding the potential usage of eminent domain with respect to the development on Cary Road. And that...
I did answer to the best of my ability, but I don't have any more information than I spoke.
That's fine. Okay, this pertains to the Riverside train station. What is the plan for conversion
concession? Oh,
Concession, I'm sorry, concession at Riverside train station? Yes, sir, okay.
What I can tell you is there's been an ongoing challenge with the concessions at Costco, Old Greenwich, Riverside, in terms of one of the requirements for the concessionaire giving priorities. They have to be part of the Board of Education Services for the Blind, BESB. It has to give first priority to this enterprise that supports physically handicapped. There's been some changes, I believe, on our Department of Public Works, Building Construction and Maintenance is in the process of trying to recast that and perhaps put out requests for proposals. I think some of it has been also for an outside, market type vendor versus call it a humanitarian cooperative, is the cost ratio. I mean, in terms of breaking even or making money. With most people now moving from digital from newspaper, behaviors have changed from what I've heard from Mr. Manelli, and so it makes it harder to attract a vendor. So I think he's trying to really research it and recast it and put it out to bid so that when you do go in, you have something. I know that during the elections, we were at the train stations and not as warm and fuzzy to come in and see stark counters and no coffee and no refreshment. So it's sort of an issue in process, but it's as a result of sort of a change in I won't say culture, but what's transpired with these enterprises that were formerly providing the service.
I have another one for you, Peter. Having a little trouble reading this one too. This is for Peter. Is it fair to have all town employees in the 401k retirement plans versus a traditional defined benefit plan?
This is a topic I seem to talk about every day. It's in part and parcel to the cost of our doing business. So since 2005 forward, we were able to attain through negotiation with all but police and fire defined contributions for all new hires. We have entered into tier 2 plans with the police, and I believe we're in negotiations. We're actually in arbitration with the firefighters. Clearly the issue of defined contribution for fire is on the table, but the realities are in the state of Connecticut, there are very few municipalities whose public safety are in defined contribution. So if in fact you move to it, you perhaps realize you may realize some cost savings, but you create a potential retention issue as you bring on people, they get trained and we cover that cost, and then they look to move to communities that retain the traditional defined benefits. It's, to me, a global issue, meaning it should be addressed by the state. And if the state were to somehow develop legislation, as they've done now with the health care plan, that's the Connecticut Partnership Plan, then I think you alleviate this disparity where you have people trading to go to the place that has the richest or best benefit. You create parity, and that's how I would resolve it. We put it on the table. I hear this all the time from certain people. You don't put it, no, we put it on the table, but you have to be able to attain it through the state of Connecticut's collective bargaining. And we have about 3 or 4 issues. The union puts on 3 or 4 issues, and we wrestle it out. And that's what we're wrestling out now with the firefighters. It's not that bad to wrestle with them. They haven't knocked us out yet.
Got a couple more here. This actually concerns train parking, and maybe we could also address this one. Sure. Okay, so we need to find a solution for tax-paying citizens of Riverside to get a parking space without a 2 to 4 year wait list.
Sure. Parking is a very hot topic at town hall these days. In fact, Mr. Krasner, I owe you a phone call on this, I believe. Several things. We've changed the vendor for the annual parking permits. And I know that there was an issue with that vendor which resulted in the delay in the mailing of the new tags. There's a greater move to automation. In terms of a waiting list, when you look at Greenwich in relationship to other communities within the Metro North line, we actually have a greater amount of parking than they do, and our waiting lists are not as long. The only solution that I see is, looking at building more parking for which there's limitations. I think, Greenwich, we're going to pick up some spaces as a result of the project that the state is doing. But in Coscob and Riverside, I think it's a little bit more constrained. So another thing that was looked at and was peeled back by the Board of Selectmen was the former director of parking wanted to initiate a 30% increase in the cost of the parking permit as a way of bringing us in closer alignment with those other communities and perhaps shaking some of the people who are holding the tags but not using it, as it's a commodity that has value, right? You want to have that luxury. We did not embrace that idea, and so we did not opt with that as a mechanism to achieve the outcome because we didn't think it was the right approach. So, but it's a big issue. We have a new director of parking services. It's a relatively new department in relation to the town, in terms of a definitive department, and we do have someone new. She's very earnest in her approach, but nonetheless, I think in all candor, she may be trying to do too much too soon. We need to take a step back and say, what is her overall objective, and approach it a little bit more slowly so that the consumer isn't hit with all this change all at once and things slip up and they lose confidence in what they traditionally can rely upon. And that's how I've assess this. It's been an issue over, say, the last 6 weeks, slowly calming down, but on my to-do list to sit down and kind of resynchronize her on that.
We're running a little short of time, so we have one more, and this is actually for Joe. In the master plan for Binney Park, it states, Binney Park consists of 5 separate but continuous sections, all located in the center of Old Greenwich between Sound Beach Avenue, Arch Street, and the Metro North Railroad. Given that the hillside area of Binney is west of Arch Street and in Riverside, would it not be more accurate and inclusive to amend the words above center of Old Greenwich to Old Greenwich and Riverside, or alternatively, Eastern Greenwich?
Thank you for proofreading the report. It's nice to know that people actually read the reports. But yes, we can amend the report. As you know, we have the committee members, and sometimes our consultant works things in a way that they see it. So obviously, yes, we can do that. It's not an issue. I'll take the card with me, and we'll see if we can do something about it going forward. I want to make one last plug for Parks and Recreation, in the sense that we have a newsletter that goes out about every 3 weeks. It's through Constant Contacts. If you want to go on the website, you can get on by just putting your email address in. We don't overburden people. We send it about every 3 weeks, and we have 11,000 contacts in our email phone book, so that we have a bigger distribution than Greenwich Time. So if you take a look.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Joe. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to the rest of the questions. It's just time is an issue for us, and we want to get Lauren for her time, because I'm sure that everybody wants to hear her. So I'm going to tell you, do a little bio on Lauren, because a couple of the questions I had was, what qualifies Lauren to be the tax assessor? So Lauren Elliott has over 30 years experience in the assessment field, most recently as the assessor for the town of Greenwich. She began her career at Patriot Properties conducting reevaluations for municipalities. She continued in the field at Vision Appraisal, formerly MMC, before becoming an assessor for many New England towns, including the city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She's been affiliated for over 8 years with the law firm of Fitzgerald, O'Brien, and Robin, where she has litigated many appeals before the Massachusetts Tax Board, as well as appearing before local boards. In addition, she has testified as an expert for both the Connecticut and the New Hampshire Attorney Generals. She is a longtime member of the IAAO, a certified assessor in Connecticut and New Hampshire, and a member of the Massachusetts Bar. Ms. Elliott served as director of the New England office for a national tax firm, As a tax representative, she was responsible for real estate and personal property tax appeals for the Northeast region, Maine to Maryland. She assisted clients in constructing successful strategies for managing their property tax liabilities. She was responsible for all case management, hiring of appraisers, and local counsel where necessary, negotiated settlements with local board of assessors, tax boards, and at the trial court level. She's a graduate of Wheaton College in Noroton, Massachusetts, completed her Juris Doctor at Western New England School of Law, and has an LLM in estate and gift tax. So I bring you Lauren Elliott.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for having me here this evening. So what I'd like to do tonight is first of all go through the procedures as to where we are and what is happening here as far as the 2015 revaluation. And then I'm going to give you a brief overview as what has actually happened to assessments throughout the entire town. And at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, first of all, just so you know, in the state of Connecticut, every municipality is required to do a revaluation every 5 years. And trust me when I tell you, I would not undertake this if I didn't have to, but we do have to do this. The town of Greenwich did your last revaluation in 2010. We just did one in 2015. We will do another one again in 2020. At that point in 2020, there is a requirement in the state of Connecticut for us to inspect each house once every 10 years. So as you probably know, you didn't see anybody come knocking on your door this time around because basically we were not required to do so. We will do that in 2020. So as soon as I finish this revaluation, I'm going to start walking around everybody's house for 2020. So in 2016, you will start seeing our office out in the field, walking around everybody's property to verify that the information that we have on file is correct. Now, you should have all received by now your assessment of notice change, and you'll see that it referred to the 2010 assessment and then 2015 assessment. 2010 being the last time we did the revaluation. What we're doing right now and what we've tried to do over the last couple months is have a number of opportunities for you all to come in and speak with the two companies that we hired to do the revaluation. We had hearings in December, we had hearings this last 2 weeks, and we also have hearings in the first week in February, I believe. If you want to come in and talk to somebody and review your assessment and review your information that we have about your property, you have until January 29th to make that appointment. When you receive your notice, you should have also received the phone number as to who to call. If you have any questions, by all means, just call the assessor's office and we'll be happy to help you. Okay. Now, once the informal hearing process is over, I then sign the grand list. And this year, because of the evaluation, I got a 1-month extension. So I'm going to sign that grand list at the end of February instead of the end of January. That means that your appeal to the Board of Assessment Appeals, which would be your next opportunity in which to make an appeal about your assessment, that appeal is not going to be in February of this year. That written appeal has to be by March 21st. And it has to be a written appeal, and you have to file it with the Board of Assessment Appeals, okay? In the month of April, the Board of Assessment Appeals will meet with anybody who filed an appeal. They will have a hearing for you. You must appear, or you must send somebody to appear. You cannot just hand the letter in. Somebody actually has to go for you. If you can't attend, please, by all means, get somebody else to do it, but you also have to have a letter of authorization that allows that person to speak on your behalf. Okay. The Board of Assessment Appeals will then send out a final letter if there is any change, and that the new assessment that we are sending out to you right now will be reflected in your July 2016 tax bill. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay. Now, as of, so every year, or not every year, every 5 years in the state of Connecticut, we have to do a revaluation. And basically what we're doing at this point in time is that I have a date, it's October 1st, 2015. And we are responsible for determining what everybody's fair market value is of your property. In other words, what do you think, if you were to sell your house now, what would your house sell for? Fair market value of your property. The state of Connecticut, for some odd reason, requires us to take 70% of that value. All of our valuations are at 70%. Okay, they're not 100%, they're at 70%. That, how we determine those values is what is concerning a lot of people here tonight, I'm sure. Basically what we do when we're looking at a fair market value, we're trying to determine what property is selling for. So in a mass appraisal, we're not doing independent studies of everybody's property. We're doing what we call a mass appraisal. What we do is we look at all the property in the entire town of Greenwich that has sold for the last 2 years. The revaluation companies that we hire will take all these sales and they basically look at them to make sure they're all arm's length transactions. And what that means is basically they are sales that are on the market, they are listed with a broker, they are basically not a inside or family sale. These are basically transactions to two independent parties. They look at all the sales, and we try to come up in a mass appraisal way to determine what your fair market value is of your property. So the process that we use not only has to work in Riverside, but it also has to work in Byron for us. It has to work throughout the entire town. And in the town of Greenwich, that's not an easy task because we have in this town a huge diversity of property and a huge diversity of value. So when we do these, I do understand it's a mass appraisal. And the point I'm trying to make and want to make here tonight is also that there may be intricacies and specific ideas or issues with your property that we have not been able to address in this mass appraisal process. And that being said, this is why we have these informal hearings. That's for you to bring forward any issues that you may have about your property so that we can better get a fair value on and assess your property accordingly. Okay. Now, there were a couple of questions that people asked in this that I received from you folks. Number one was, how are we dealing with Storm Sandy? And we're dealing with it in a couple of different ways. First of all, we have now with technology, we have the ability to figure out through our GIS system and through our mapping system what properties are affected by either what we call the FEMA map, or we also have a slosh map. And the slosh map basically is the map that gives me the properties that are going to be affected by Hurricane Category 1, a Hurricane Category 2, a Hurricane Category 3, and 4. So what we did is we made anybody who has issues or who is affected by these things, we've automatically put on your property record card and reduced your values based upon those FEMA maps. Now, if by chance we have a Hurricane 4, I did not address that because basically that's going to do something rather catastrophic to the town of Greenwich, and at that point we'll deal with it. But for the time being, what we did this time around is we're trying to take into account anybody who is near the water that has any of those issues. Now, there's a couple of things I also need to be clear about. We're assuming when we're doing these valuations that your house is compliant. Okay, I don't know if it isn't or it is or isn't. I do know of all the people recently, I think there's about 30 or so that took out permits and made their houses compliant as of 2014 or 15. However, some people may have been compliant back in 1995 and they're no longer compliant now. Those people, you need to come in and either make an appointment, an informal hearing with me, with the revaluation company, or come in and speak to me. Because we do need to make an adjustment if by chance you raised your house to 8 feet, but now you're supposed to raise it to 12. Okay, I don't know how high your house is. Okay, you'll have to help us out on that. Okay, so that was number one. Number two is what we're also finding is that a lot of you have seen probably an increase in values, probably disproportionate to some other people in town. Okay, there's a couple of things I want you to take a look at. First of all, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to follow what the real estate market in each section of town is doing. So we are looking at all the sales within Riverside, within all your neighbors, and we're trying to see basically what has happened to your assessments. There's a couple of things that happened in 2010, and I don't really understand why, but it did. For some odd reason, some property values, and I'm noticing that 2005 is here. There are some instances in 2010 where their values probably went down a rather large amount. And so what we're finding is we're bringing those people back up to the 2015. It's 2005 and 2015. It's not, depending on what it is, depending on where you are, may or may not be, if you look at globally, you should be within a few percentages of each other. So what we're finding is that in 2005 we were here. 2010, there was some reduction. Our overall grand list did go down 13% at that point in time. And now we're trying to bring you back up to fair market value now. So we're seeing some people that did take a rather significant change from 2010. What I'm asking you to do is also look back and see what your 2005 value was as well. Okay? I will open up the floor to questions. Sure.
You referred to a contractor. Who is that and how are they and you compensated?
I'm on salary. Town of Greenwich pays me very well, thank you. What we do in the bidding process, as far as hiring revaluation companies, we put this out to bid. They bid it basically on a per parcel basis. We hired the same people that did the town of Darien to do the residential portion of this. They are hired based on a contract, and within that contract, it requires them to do the revaluation, give us X amount of days of hiring, and basically it's a straight contractual price.
And who was that?
Tyler Technologies did the residential portion. We had somebody different do the commercial for us this time. Spread it out a little bit. Yes?
Yes, what have you been able to show, or at least you've been told by all the realtors, that your house, because of the elevation, in my case, I'm at 8.5 feet. I've been, flooded inside the house 4 times since I've been there.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the point of what I'm trying is, what if you can, is it possible to show that your house is worth 0 and your land is worth what you claim it is, but the house is actually worth 0 because nobody would buy the property and keep the house, they would tear the house down, which would cost them approximately $25,000. So therefore, the house is theoretically worth 0 minus $25,000. Is there any way to show that?
Well, here's the problem with that. First of all, in assessing property, I have to assume that there's some value to a house, regardless of whether somebody else may come in and tear it down or not. Okay? If you're living in a house, you have heating and plumbing and fixtures. By law, I have an obligation in which to value that. Okay? Statutory says, the Connecticut State statutes say, there's an improvement on it. I have to put some sort of value on it. I cannot necessarily put a negative value on it. So regardless of whether, and here's the thing with teardowns. And when I went back and I said, we have such diverse property, people may be tearing houses down here in certain instances in Riverside, but they're not necessarily doing that in Byram. So a house that you may tear down here, if I had the same exact house in Byram, I have to have a value on that because they're not going to tear it down. Okay? So we have to be careful in the mass appraisal world versus a fee simple. In other words, if somebody was going to buy your property, they may very well tear it down, or they may raise it. But as far as taxing, I have to tax something. If it's a structure there, I have an obligation in which to tax it. So I do have to put a value on it. Okay?
For the person who had their house reduced for market reason, it was accepted that it was approved and the house allowed it to been reduced. Now it's gone up again. Is it up to me that with the same information?
It depends on what that reduction was for.
Can you repeat the question?
I guess you got a reduction at the Board of Assessment Appeals? Okay. There's certain things that we're trying to we're definitely trying to make uniform throughout the town. And the Board of Assessment Appeals, depending on who heard it, whatever, there's some certain changes and reductions to that may or may not be pertinent anymore, depending on what it is or what it was. Every time we do a revaluation, I have an obligation, and the assessor's office has an obligation to make sure that if something was done in error, wasn't done properly. For instance, I had a couple of houses on John Street that had a traffic influence. I don't know about you, but they don't, so there's certain things that they may have gotten there before for some odd reason. If by chance you do not see it, and it's something that's pertinent, yes, please bring it to our attention again, okay? Yes, sir.
It's sort of commonplace that there are three factors in real estate value are location, location, location. So if a given house, let's say, has a live-in value, use value, and environment, the same house in Riverside, which is a different location, has no market value. It emphasizes its market value because the developer would not pay for the improvements. Wouldn't you take the location between the different sections of town into account? And second, is there anything in the statute that would bar you from putting, let's say, a token value of, let's say, $1,000 on a house that in the market would have no value because it would be a tear down on any, after any sale?
First of all, we do make distinction in location, and that's reflected in the land values. Okay, so your land values are going to be different throughout the entire town. But as far as the structure is concerned, I have an obligation, as I said before, to tax it. I cannot, if somebody's living in a house, and here's the thing, you have it, you're still living there, and chances are you're going to, not until you sell it, do you seem to think that value is going to have zero. It still, even though it may be a tear down, it still has value, and I have to tax it that way.
But it's not a market value. A willing buyer would not buy that house, would not pay for the fact that the structure, on a house that's flooded repeatedly.
I'm not saying it may not be torn down. However, it does have to have, I do have to assess some value to it.
But it's a market. Shouldn't it be a market value?
Is your 100% value that you have, including your dwelling and your land value?
That should be a fair, arm's length exchange market value.
Right, and the question is, okay, I come up with it in a certain fashion in the sense that I have, I don't know exactly what I have on your property, sir, but I come up with, say I have $2 million on it, okay, I'm just saying for instance. My allocation of building to land, you may actually, even though there's a house on it, or you seem to think it's the land and not the dwelling, your argument and your best proof is to tell me what is the fair market value of that property, okay? I understand your concern and that you're going to tear, you seem to think that this house is going to get torn down, I get that, however, if you're going to argue, chances are, look at the total value. I have to allocate some of that value to the structure.
So you start with the total value of the parts, all improvements, and land.
Right. The bottom line is its total value, okay?
Fair enough, I follow you.
Okay? Yeah.
I'd like to think I'm pretty aware of what's going on in the town, but I don't know what event happened that in my neighborhood, which is Meyer Place, Anthony Place, over by the highway, the lowest raise we had was in the 20% bracket up to 55%. The entire neighborhood blew through the roof, and I don't know what event happened that brought our whole neighborhood up so far. If they closed 95 and turned it into a park, we might get that value back. But short of that, I just don't know what made that neighborhood bounce that way.
Here's what the revaluation company came in and they looked at the last 2 years of sales. I also went back and looked at the last 5 years of sales and transactions. Now, So we have at least 700-800 sales per year. So I have the ability to go back. Chances are, and I don't know, here's the thing. I don't know what, old to new is not the best argument for people. It's what is your fair market value right now, today?
I'll sell it to you for my assessed valuation right now. Never mind the market value.
Come to the Board of Assessment Appeal, there's going to be a gentleman with a checkbook, and he's going to be buying some property. It goes back to sales. Now, whether or not, if there's no sales in that neighborhood, I honestly don't know, and off the top of my head, I can't explain, I don't know. But chances are, if you come into one of our offices or go to the town website and you go and you look, we have a listing of every single property with all the sales, every single sales that had happened in the last 5 years. Okay?
As an aside to that, I did check all the sales for the last 5 years, and I know what hurt our neighborhood. We had tear downs of 2,100 square foot houses that were replaced with 4,500 square foot houses, and those have been the only sales in the neighborhood. But my other question is, I did it this afternoon, and I would find a sale of a home at $12 million that was accomplished in August of this year that has a current assessment of $2.4 million.
Okay.
How does that happen?
Because there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, that $12 million sale could have a couple of things. It could be more than one parcel. Number one.
It was one parcel.
Okay, number two is, guess what they do? They tear the houses down. So I don't know exactly what $12 million sale you're looking at, but I'm pretty sure that I will go check that because there's not too many of them. But we've been following and tracking these sales. And how we determine whether a revaluation is actually proper or not is that I have the revaluation company look at all sales up to October 1st. I now, and myself in my office, we are looking at all the sales from October 1st to present. So we have 3 or 4 months of sales to determine whether or not these are, if our analysis and if our mass appraisal is working or not. Like I said, I don't know off the top of my head. But there's a lot of things that can happen in a property. First of all, it sells for something and then they tear the house down. Or it's a $12 million sale and the house isn't built yet. It could be a number of different reasons. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I've got more of a comment than a question because I hear what this man is saying about the ranges, and then my own mother who lives here, her property taxes went up 41%. And I just feel like, so in this mass reevaluation, if at any time it goes over a certain percentage, those houses should be looked at because people's taxes at any point should not go up 41%. But I think the bigger thing here is we moved here from Westchester. I grew up in New York. We live here now. I love it here now. But when we were looking to move up here, the cost of the house was 3 times more than in a lovely town of Westchester. But the taxes were significantly lower. So that justified, so you do the math over 20 years and you're like, where do you want to be? But without that tax difference, right, compared to say Westchester, and you add the difference in the commute to Manhattan, it takes away the interest for very educated working Manhattan people to move here and live here when they could live in Westchester and have a 30-minute commute. So I think it's just something like if there's any house that during one of these every 5 years goes up over a certain percentage that's just not reasonable. It's just not reasonable for your taxes to go up 30, 40, 50%. When we're a town that kind of prides ourselves on it, we don't have debt, our taxes are reasonable, we have these resources. It's what makes Greenwich great. So I think, again, when they're above a certain percentage, it has to be a red flag. Like it just can't be put on the people that live here.
The way this, I've worked in New York, so I understand how New York works, and that's different. The problem here is that the state of Connecticut over the years has struggled with this because we used to do revaluations every 10 years. And we would actually take people's assessments and times them by 3. I mean, when you did a revaluation back in 1980 and 1990, the difference over 10 years was exorbitant. Property taxes in the state of Connecticut are an ad valorem tax. That means we tax you based on your value. And the way the state of Connecticut is actually set up in its statutes, it requires me to do this every 5 years. Now, to alleviate those high jumps in between revaluations, the way to alleviate that is to do it more frequently. And that, unfortunately, is not, unfortunately, I don't have the authority in which to do at this point in time. In other words, if the assessments are supposed to follow what's happening to the real estate market, okay? If values are going up, the assessments need to go up. If values are going down, assessments need to go down. And I have to, and the state requires me to do that once every 5 years. And unfortunately, there's no cap or percentage increase the way the system is set up here in the state of Connecticut for us to say, okay, you know, there's not a proposition 2.5. We have there are certain, in other jurisdictions, there are certain abilities and caps that say, okay, your taxes can't go up more than that. State of Connecticut, we just don't have that, I'm afraid. Yes?
One of the issues we've had in Riverside, just to build on that point you made, is that we've had more new construction in Riverside than any other part of town. More than Old Greenwich, more than Central Greenwich. And because of that, it's driven up the average price. So all of our assessments are now going up, regardless of whether we now are worth that. So like my house went up 47%, but my value didn't go up 47% in a 5-year period. But the average in Riverside did. So it's driving everybody up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm following that, but.
Well, if you're using the average price.
We're not using the average price. Let me try to explain something. We're not using when I talk about overall, I'm talking about overall because I can't specifically talk to about everybody's property. There's a couple of things that we did differently here in this revaluation. One of which was we had a majority of value in the land and very little on the structures. And we tried to change that just a little bit because our assessments were coming distorted. And what we were trying to do is we're trying to make the distinction between all those new, big, nice new houses that are going up and those old houses, older homes that have not had any updates. If your land values were all the same, it wouldn't make a difference whether there's, basically under that philosophy, if we kept as much value in the land as we had previously, Riverside would have gone way, way up because there would have been all your value was in the land. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a distinction between those houses that are newly constructed and those houses that are old. And if you look at your property record card now, you'll see that a house that is either been renovated or a newly built house will have a much different depreciation on it than older homes. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to distinguish more those houses that have not been updated versus those houses that are new and have been updated. Okay? Yes?
When the bill came out, they gave us an estimate of what the tax would be in the current rate. People don't understand that as the rent list goes up,
Mill rate's
the bill
coming
rate
down.
goes down.
Right.
So the total assessment, which you need to look at, not the
Right.
tax.
Here's what happened. We have, in this town of Greenwich, we have $44 billion of taxable property. Okay? It's a lot. I take 70% of that. The majority of your value is in residential properties. Of those, we have about 22,000 parcels, just a little less. Of those 22,000, 19,000 of them are residential. So the majority of your tax base here in this town is residential. That's about 80% of the overall grand list. Your commercial properties are only about 12%. So it's truly what's happening in the residential market that is driving what happens to the grand list. The grand list did go up, and it went up about 5%. I think ultimately that's where it will ultimately end up. I'm not 100% sure, but that's where it is. So your mill rate will go down a bit because the overall grand list did go up. Your tax rate should come down. Yes, sir.
I think we all understand our taxes are going to be a function of both the assessed value, which is important for this community, and mill rate. I'm interested in the dynamics. This is really more a key question that, especially you, Peter, have such an institutional experience here with this whole process. What do they go through in trying to determine when certain communities in Greenwich are seeing assessment increases, Riverside by 15%, documentation, Old Greenwich 11%, etc. Other areas kind of flat or down. Given the fact that the mantra for so many years is modest and predictable tax increases, is the phrase I love to hear, which is great. How do they balance that? A 16%, 50% increase in Riverside is not going to be viewed as modest and predictable, even with the adjustment of no.
Having been in a meeting earlier today with my predecessor, Jim Lash, is now chairing the budget committee, this particular topic came up from one of our members, thinking that with the reassessment, we're going to see appreciably more greater revenue. And what was stated and what we've said all the time, it's a zero-sum game. So it's what Ms. Ferry said is correspondingly the mill rate is going to go down if the grand list goes up, and that recalibrates the entire base in which you're drawing your revenue. So as I look at it, is we're recalibrating based upon market analysis of what the assessor determines through this process, your home is worth, your property is worth. So for the people who have experienced this disproportionate increase, you have the ability to challenge it. And the way you challenge it is look at the metrics. It's not a subjective process in my view. It's one that's based upon a set of circumstances, namely the sale. So as someone said here, well, if you want to give me that for my property, I'll take it. Well, that's somewhat being facetious, but I think if I were to be in that situation, I would begin to, again, look at what the assessor said, the comparables, and delve into deeply the fact what she said, which I do think is a significant contributor to some of this, is to try to recalibrate the neighborhoods where you may have a tear down and then a home that's maxed out to the FAR. And if we're doing mass appraisal, I think what Lauren is saying is she's trying hard though to account for that, so that it's not just a broad brush. And the way to account for it is, previously, I'm going to make up numbers that she didn't give us, 80% of the overall value was in the land when it perhaps should have been more like 60 or 70. And I think she's trying to look at it very forensically, even though it's a mass appraisal, to address that. But in terms of how the BET looks at it, and how I look at it is, we're looking at not having a 7% increase one year and a 0% one year. I think most people in Greenwich are very astute and educated, but we see this in other governments where political people get elected saying, well, this year we had no increase in the mill rate. But the next year, you have a 7% increase. That's just foolish. Because it's, to me, if I'm looking at it, it's someone wants to put that on no increase. We've had that years and years ago. You can find it in the budget books. So the function of the assessment is to recalibrate the proportion of what people are paying based upon the value in their land. And in terms of the overall budget, we're trying to keep the overall growth for everyone at a level that we think is sustainable. And I'll put in one caveat. We're challenged with that in part because very few parts of the budget are discretionary. If you take the philosophy that Greenwich enjoys certain services and service levels. Now we can change that to get to zero, but I think we would have a very different conversation tonight in terms of what people thought about Greenwich. But that could be before us. I don't want to paint a doom and gloom, but I think you have to look. I look broadly at what's going on around us, and in terms of what's occurring at the state, we're not that very far off from the conversations about the property tax system. In fact, the Moore Commission delved into this subject and looking at perhaps a unified state property tax. One only has to Google Brendan Sharkey, Speaker of the State House of Representatives, and read a lot of his thoughts on this. He's a believer in doing something about this. I interpret doing something about this as really redistributing the state burden. So think of it to the areas that have greater capacity to pay the tax. So I hope I answered your question. You have 4 BET members who are here tonight. Leslie's been with the assessment. She probably can offline give you some of her insights. But I mean, I think there's been a steadfast view to kind of keep the annual expenditure impact to 3% or less.
I'd like to ask one last question myself. I actually went to the appeal process, or to the appeals to ask them about my house, and they told me somebody would be in touch. So will somebody be in touch before the actual hearing time? Do I have time to-
Yes. So here's what happens. So if you have come in for an informal hearing and you've asked for us to come out and inspect your property, we're doing that. Actually, I'm on the hook tomorrow, so. No, I don't think you're on my list yet. We will be calling you, if you gave us your phone number, we will be calling you in the next 2 weeks to do inspections. Okay?
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I want to thank all of you for coming out to hear our 3 wonderful speakers. I hope you give your email address to the girls at the back door to keep you informed on what's going on in Riverside, and we'll see you at our next annual meeting.